Study Section 7. The Spanish Empire in the New World. Introduction. The focus of this study section centers on how, through war, the Spaniards consolidated their presence and eventual colonization of what came to be regarded as America and its environs. After the Spaniards reached the New World, they went ahead to possess the land discovered in the New World. This was after they met autochthonous peoples who had developed very sophisticated civilization and were already domiciled in the area. Find out what transpired between these people and the Spaniard explorers in the study section. Learning outcomes. When you study this section, you should be able to 1. Explain how the effect of Coates and Pizarro culminated into the emergency of the New World under the Spanish Empire. 2. Give detailed accounts of how economic activities in the old Mexico and Peru under Spanish Empire metamorphosed from mining to agriculture and back to mining. Terminology. Autochthonous, an inhabitant of a place who is an indigenous rather than descendant from migrant colonists. Conquistador, a conqueror, especially one of the Spanish conqueror of Mexico and Peru in the 16th century. Spanish Empire in Central and South America. By the mid-16th century, all major centers of indigenous American civilization had fallen under Spanish control. 2 major factors made the conquest and creation of Spanish Empire in the New World a success. First is the belligerent nature of Castilians as manifested in the activities of conquistadors like Coates and Pizarro. And secondly is the doggedness with which the Catholic missionaries from Spain tried to proselytize, educate, and civilize the inhabitants of the New World. In examining the establishment of the Spanish Empire, the location of gold and silver deposits, coupled with the availability of Indian labor, determined the settlement of Europeans in the New World. These same factors logically led to the urbanization of mining centers, with its attendant consequences on the indigenous population. Gold was first discovered in Hispaniola, then in Cuba and Puerto Rico, respectively. In the same sequence, the colonization of this area took place. The Spanish Empire building process began with Columbus' occupation of Hispaniola, though his era as the governor of the territory was an unsuccessful one. The era of his successors, Bobadilla and Nicolas de Ovando, were much more eventful. Ovando, who had full powers to hire and fire as well as to expel troublesome Spaniards, succeeded in consolidating Spanish control of the territory. It was from Hispaniola that other islands such as Jamaica 1509 and Cuba 1511 to 1514 were occupied by the Spanish. However, the major colonization of the mainland of Central and Southern America took place between 1520 to 1535, with conquest of notable places like Mexico and Peru by the conquistadors. After 1536, the Spanish royal authority became much more felt in the areas conquered. It must be noted that it was essentially the cities of American mainland that the Spanish conquistadors concentrated upon, while the more interior and economically unrewarding areas largely remained autonomous. The conquest of Mexico, which was then ruled by a warlike group known as Aztec, and Peru, then dominated by the Incas, boldly illustrates the apogee of Spanish colonial appropriation in the New World. Spanish Empire in Central and South America. Just as Hispaniola served as a laughing part of attack on Cuba, in like manner was Cuba the base from which Spanish subjugation, eventual control of Mexico took place. The conquest of Peru and Mexico were spearheaded by two great military commanders, Anado, Cortes, and Pizarro. Cortes, who embarked on taking Mexico in 1519, exploited the internal dissension necessitated by opposition of certain coastal groups that suffered from Aztec dominations. Cortes thus found in this group willing Indian collaborators with which he joined forces. After an initial success, he established a town known as Veracruz by August 1519 and assumed the title of governor and commander. This implies his declaration of autonomy from the Cuban governor's control, Velázquez. By the end of the year, Cortes has reached Mexico, but attempts establishing an effective control had to wait for a more urgent business. This was the warding off of a rival expedition sent from Cuba by Velasco, who did not take kindly to Cortes' declaration of autonomy. After successfully stamping out his rivals from the coast, he returned for a final onslaught on Mexico, which fell to his imperial firepower in 1521. With the capture of Mexico, all oppositions were quelled. It remains to add that Cortes' assistant Alvarado further extended Spanish control over Maya, rulers of Guatemala and San Salvador. The territorial conquest of Alvarado and Cortes resulted in what came to be known as New Spain, i.e., the area from Mexico to the Isthmus of Panama in Central Africa. If Cortes was a conqueror of Central America, Pizarro can be credited with the same fate in South America. After the appointment of Captain General and Governor of Peru in 1528, Pizarro proceeded to make his governorship of Peru a reality in 1530. He launched his attack from Panama and captured Cusco, the capital of Peru. Like the Aztec, the Inca ruler had been weakened by civil war and with their unsophisticated weapons, could not stop Pizarro's march on their empire. Towards the end of 1533, the Inca Empire had fallen prey of another Spanish conquistador, who proceeded to shift the capital from Cusco to Lima, a patch of territory whose close to the coast in commemoration of a new administration of the area. The determination and bravery of the conquistador gave Spain the privilege of controlling the most populous area of Central and South America. Having examined the extent of Spanish Empire in Central and South America, we can now proceed to examine their economic activities. Spanish economic activities. The first major economic activity of the Spanish conquistador was mining. While they depended on the Indian population for their food requirements, and Spanish settlers paid full attention to the search and exploitation of gold in the Caribbean islands initially occupied. In places like Hispaniola and elsewhere in other islands, gold was mined either from shallow surface digging or more often worked from the sand and gravel of streams. This method of extracting gold required the involvement of large number of people, and in this the Indian population were used. However, the Brazilian slave labor exploitation meted out on the Indians. The outbreak of epidemics such as smallpox, coupled with a famine that plagued the communities, proved too tough for the Indian population to bear. Thus, their population dropped from the 1 million mark in 1492 to barely 100,000 by 1510. The discoveries reinstated mining as the major economic activities, while silver was soon to replace gold as the major Spanish-American export for Europe. Hitherto, Europe before 1540 produced more silver than Spanish America, but by the second half of the 16th century, the change in fortune has occurred. Potosi and Zacatecas were to become the nerve centers for the colonial economy based on silver. The centers of mining became unbanished with large Spanish settled population. Consequently, Spanish courts were set up to check the attendant social vices conterminous with urbanization. The Spanish crown established its authority after 1535 and got 1/5 of all precious metal produced in Spanish America. The domination of silver production continued till much after the 1950s, when its production level rose astronomically. Other products exported from Spanish America included hide, tobacco, indigo, and sugar to Europe. Of course, the least product was to attract considerably black slave labor in its production, and this contributed significantly to the Spanish-American economy by the end of the 17th century. Study section summary. In this study section, you have learned that 1. As in most colonial ventures during this period, primary to the Spanish presence and occupation of parts of Central and South American cities was a desire to sequestrate the gold and silver resources of the indigenous peoples. 2. The process of conquest produced prominent Spanish warriors whose efforts resulted in the successful Spanish occupations and administrations of conquered areas. End of study section 7. Thanks for listening.